All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, BSides Las Vegas is proud to bring to you two of the finest minds in all of information security. Over here we have the man whose beard has no fear, one of the most influential voices in information security, one of the former authors of the DBIR, I know you all know what that is, Mr. Kyle Maxwell. And over here we have the Brazilian bad boy, a science guy in the MLSec project, and a darn handsome fellow. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Pinto and Kyle Maxwell!
And this is why I love when Kevin introduces me. He's too much of a wrestling fan. To go very quickly through who we are, I'm a researcher at VeriSign iDefense. I'm a malware researcher there. I'm a math smuggler. When math labs get blown up, then you know why. That's me. I used to be an incident responder. I fortunately don't have to do that anymore, and that's very good for my ability to sleep through a complete night without getting woken up. Alex will talk more about our hacker spirit animals, but you may also refer to me as axiomatic armadillo if you blame a breach on me.
Yes, and I'm Alex, and I do some science at MLSec project, mostly training machine learning models. That's not quite like Pokemon training. I wish it was more like it, but it's not. And yeah, anyway, mostly of my research, and also a lot of what we're going to talk about today is about network security. And I mean, I was tortured by Sims as a child. I don't want that to happen again. And I really think that we can help. So I'm caffeinated capybara, okay? So if you ever get breached by a Brazilian actor, just maybe it's not me. But anyway, we're gonna go over some things, and I just want to make sure that you guys have a general idea, and we're gonna let it go. We're gonna turn over to my good friend Kyle here for Threat Intel 102.
All right, so who's still drunk from last night first? Only one hand. I don't believe you. You're all liars. So what we're going to do is go very quickly through an idea of not Threat Intel 101 because that's boring. And here's what we're going to call it 201. They said, no, it's too basic for that. So we're going to talk about some basic concepts. And actually, I'm going to kind of deflate the rest of the talk and take a little bit of air out of his tires here, because I'm talking about why a lot of these things suck in the first place. So, when we talk about threat intel, what we really care about are two core things about what somebody, whether it's an adversary or an ally, I'm sorry, we're going to stop using the word adversary now, we're going to say our foes. Like the Viking warriors of old, they didn't have adversaries, they had foes. What are your foes able to do? That is, what is their capability? And what are they intending to do? Frequently, we are measuring or trying to somehow understand the former. Oh, look, this exploit came out, right? Ergo, Mike's talked a little bit ago. And so they have this capability. But when we're talking about specific foes and their battle plans against your fortress, we care also about what they are intending to do, right? Because we can do a lot of things. If somebody asks you or me to build something, yeah, I can build a lot of things. What am I actually going to build? What am I actually going to do? What am I actually going to attack? That's a different thing. So, this is the core idea of really what threat intel should be all about, is capability and intent, both of those. Now, that leads us to a couple of dichotomies, if you will, in some different concepts. So we're going to have a little bit of a cage match between some different concepts that we have here. First of all, Dave Eitel, who I don't think is here, but and that's good because he could totally kick my ass, occasionally makes the excellent point that a lot of times we're using indicators as a new term for what we used to call signatures. And that's not really true, but it's kind of true. It's true that sometimes we're using them that way, but it's not true because we shouldn't be. So a signature should be kind of thought of as a fingerprint. You know that if you see this particular signature, it should be used in such a way that you know that this particular thing happened, either this particular event occurred, or you can tie this to a particular foe, or you can tie this to Something that you can be very confident about. Whereas an indicator says, hey, look over there. Something sneaky. I heard a branch break or something like that. So the idea, right. Somebody's creeping up on you, like Alex creeps up whenever he thinks that my Scott should be his. So these are, when we talk today, we're talking about indicators, i.e., you would never, and I was going to talk about why, you would never just feed these lists of addresses, for example, directly into your firewall and say, block all this traffic because, oh my God, you will get fired. We don't have nearly that much confidence in these sorts of things. This leads us to this idea of the difference between data and intelligence. So, when a threat intel vendor, including the one that I work for, the other ones that I work for, if they say, we're selling you threat intel, and they give you a list of IP addresses, you can pretty much kick that salesperson's ass because they're talking about specific data, and data without context is useless. If you don't know what this is for, then it's pointless. You want actual intelligence that, as we talked about a moment ago, says something about capability and intent and is specific. If it is, these addresses are bad, real bad, watch out, then it's useless to you. One of the other distinctions that we make at Intel is between tactical and strategic. And I could go on about this for literally a whole talk, but I'm going to overly simplify. What? I won't because we got cooler stuff to get to. But the idea is that tactical versus strategic are the really specific things. So tactical intel is the what is happening and how it's happening. And the strategic is the who is doing it and why are they doing it. It's a little bit about capability intent, but it's structured a little bit differently because what we're talking about is, for example, strategic intel might say that caffeinated capybara is coming for your secret coffee bean roasting plans, right? Because he wants to use that to steal your plans and smuggle coffee in from Brazil here because he secretly makes all of his money as a coffee smuggler.
That's a very likely scenario, by the way.
Right. Whereas tactical intel might say, okay, this is how he does it. He's going to send he's going to send a PDF with this type of exploit to these sorts of people, and he's going to drop this sort of thing. This suddenly gets a lot more tactical and down into the how and the what. The other thing that's important, just like with coding, and with a lot of other things, you have a distinction between atomic indicators and composite indicators. So an atomic indicator is one piece of information, an IP address, a string that you're going to see in a packet. Whereas composite indicators are going to be when you put these things together. When you see this IP address or any of these IP addresses doing these sorts of things, and you coordinate with other things, now you start to be able to put it together and get something useful, especially as you ascend what we like to refer to as the pyramid of pain. I use this slide every time because I just like being able to say, pyramid of pain. Right. So, this is actually from a guy named David Bianco who works at, I guess now FireEye, previously at Mandiant. And a lot of us might quibble with some really specific details. Alex and I are in this. But here's the basic concept that you should take away from this, and the concept is really good and valid. At the bottom of the pyramid of pain, you get stuff that is really easy to find and really easy for your foe to change. Right? It's really easy to get lots of hash values of badness. And it's also really easy for the adversary to recompile with one bit flipped and get an entirely different hash. So that's not causing that much pain to your foe, and it's not, even though it's not that painful for you to get. As you ascend this pyramid, it's more painful for you to get this information. It takes more work, more effort, but also it's things that are harder for the adversary to change. It's much harder for the adversary at the peak, right, to change the whole way he goes about his attack than it is for him to flip this bit and recompile his malware. Versus, it's also a lot harder to be able to isolate this information and pull that out and say, okay, this is how this particular foe works. So we talk about the fact that, though, that when we say simple and easy, as we're going to see here, domain names and IP addresses are relatively simple and easy. They're simple and easy to get. That doesn't actually mean it's always simple and easy, and we're going to have a tool later on talking about why that is. But with that said, when you get these threat intel feeds, in general, remember, there's really threat data with a little bit of context, so it's kind of intel, but honestly, it's kind of sucky, because what you really want to know are who is going to attack you, why are they going to attack you, and how are they going to go about doing it. And IP addresses and domain names, as we see here, are just kind of the start of it. So please don't think of what we're presenting today as anything like the be-all, end-all of this. It's trying to bring a little bit of structure to analyzing this value, and then as time goes on, one of the core purposes of Alex's MLSec project is to start to bring more value to higher pieces of the chain as well. With that, Alex is now going to talk about whatever the hell he's going to talk about.
So anyway, taking from that, I guess the point that I'm trying to make, and this is kind of a math talk, I guess, is we don't always get our intelligence all packaged up with cute animal names, right? We usually are just getting like a bunch of IP addresses, a bunch of domain names. So can we actually measure this? Can we actually have a way to see if these things that we're just scraping from the internet, or that people are selling us for a very, very, very high price, by the way, it's something that's actually helping what we're doing, right? And of course, intelligence is used very broadly here, in the sense that, as Kyle said, it depends on the context. So the data is actually only going to be as good as the use that you have of it and how applicable it is for your own environment. So anyway, Kyle already mentioned some of the few things here, that should we use them for blocking or not? The good rule of thumb is no, maybe maybe file hashes, maybe host names, right? Isn't the whole point of IATA trying to open source antivirus signatures? And I just got kicked out by a bunch of groups right now. But anyway, we have a way now to gather this data and somehow apply them in bulk, which is very good, but we just have to be very careful with maybe host names. I mean, there's not a lot of reuse for, I don't know, evilhacker.com as far as SEO is concerned. People are not going to reuse that domains, but there's a different problem for IP addresses. Again, and this is a point where me and Kyle, we argue a little bit. Are IP addresses more valuable or less valuable than domain names, right? I personally think that the cost associated with changing an IP address for an attacker is higher than a domain name. It's easier for you to publish, I don't know, to register, I don't know, 1,000 domains from your DGA, right, and just register in different registrars and keep moving around. But then you have this couple of IP addresses of places that either are turning a blind eye, or they are somehow complicit with the fact that you're hosting malware or something like that over that. The fact that it's finite, right, the fact that there are different actors that are controlling those different IP spaces, and some of them will be more lenient, will be less lenient, right? It kind of creates a structure, kind of creates an economic incentive for us to try to figure out, okay, let's try to analyze the IP addresses at least to see if we can gather something from it, something that's potentially useful, right? So the point is, and the question is, right, can we try to measure how much they help, right? What are the kinds of metrics that we can get? And given that we have a bunch of feeds, right, how do we choose which one of them will be more appropriate for our use case or for whatever we're trying to build or protect against or something like that? So anyway, what are we working for? What are we working with here? So we're basically getting raw information. So this comes from a bunch of publicly available feeds, right? We actually gathered this data for a month. Actually, I've been gathering it for much longer, but I'm only publishing a month of this data. And we have some raw data, right? And Combine is the tool we're going to talk later, which is the one we're using to harvest this. And we're extracting both the IP addresses and domain names as a first step, right? And then we are separating it out in inbound and outbound, right? And this is just the kind of the beginning of the idea, where we are making sure that we have this bunch of indicators, right? And some of them will be more turned to, okay, these are people who are scanning you. There's some sort of auto SSH exploitation or trying different IP address, different usernames. Or we have maybe people who are spamming, sending spam. And we have the outbound view, which is pretty much who are the IP addresses who are hosting malware distribution centers, or the IP addresses who are hosting command and control servers.
So that when Alex first told me about this inbound versus outbound, the way it clicked with me was, it's inbound or outbound from your network. Where would you expect to see traffic related to this address? Is the traffic inbound to your network from this foe, or is it outbound from your network to connecting to a C2 server or whatever?
And yes, that's precisely it. And the data flow is important. We could, if we had enough data, if we had enough samples, we could further separate this even more. We could try to just have someone specifically for CNC, have something specific for droppers, or something specific for that. We're trying to be broad, just to try to have enough data to play around. But anyway, that's pretty much it. That's 22 different feeds, right? Some of them have data on both, so you can see them separated there. AlienVote is an example. And what did we do? How did we prepare this data, right? And so first of all, we're only interested in trying in doing some experiments with the IP addresses. So we actually used a passive DNS database from Farsight to basically resolve all these domain names to IP addresses that were active on that date. That's very important, right? Most of these guys don't exist anymore, but at that date, these were the IP addresses that were there for them, and potentially were involved in something malicious because they were in a domain that was reported as malicious. Of course, if, but that's the kind of assumptions that we're working with when we actually accept these threat intelligence feeds and try to work with them, right? And we also removed all non-public IP addresses because they don't really fit the purpose of our experiment. We understand it's a parking technique. We understand there's other parking techniques. We know you're all pros. It's just that it doesn't really fit this example. Anyway, finally, and I know this is getting a little bit boring. We'll get into the cool stuff later. It's just that it's kind of an experiment. You kind of have to explain this shit. For each IP address, we enriched it, right? We enriched with the information from the AS, right? Both the AS name and the AS number. The country it's from, right? Just because we want to play around with some animal names. And the reverse host. So what would be the most popular PTR that it would have on DNS on that specific day, again, using passive DNS.
And honestly, a lot of times it's not the PTR record. It's using passive DNS. It's getting whatever A record pointed to it.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases.
Yeah. So anyway, we're not playing around with reverse hosting on this talk. I had some ideas for it, but the data was too sparse. It wasn't really worth it. But we'll be mostly talking about ASNs, and we'll be talking about geolocations. However, although we're talking about geolocations, we are not doing maps. Guys, let the maps go. They're not a good way to represent this data. Okay? Please, right? A bar chart, you just say how they are. Let it go. So this is what it looks like in the end, right? We have a small enriched sample here, right? And I just picked up 3 guys, and you have an entity, which is pretty much the IP address. They're all IP addresses, which what we're using, direction, which source it came from, date, blah, blah, blah. You can see it's all there. And this is pretty much the data set that we're using for this. As you can see, this kind of looks like code, right? And we'll get to that. But this is all actual commands from the tool that we're releasing. And you can just do everything at home. Why would you do that? But you can just redo everything at home. Anyway, so what are we doing here? I came up with 3 different tests, which have terrible names. I take suggestions for new names. And I think this is an accident. Anyway, so we have what we're calling a novelty test, right? Which is pretty much, let's check, as these feeds progress during the day, how often do they change? I did not plan for this. I honestly say that. This is not a part of the talk. This is not a drill. Anyway, how often do they update themselves? Is it like the same list of IP addresses every single day? Are new IP addresses added? Are IP addresses leave the actual list? How do we compare that? A very interesting one, which we're calling overlap. It's pretty much, you got all these different sources. Are they just giving me the same IP addresses or the same domain names, right? And I actually buying two things for $50,000. I have my best people on it, and okay, I have Kyle on it. I have 50K in one feed and 50K in another feed. And are they just giving me the same IP addresses, and I have no idea what I'm doing? And finally, the one that's probably going to be the most interesting one, at least was the one I gave most thought, was the population. So, and that's really where we use the ASN and the country. Thank you so much. And we could take the country. Shut up, Kevin. And we take the country and the ASN and do the comparison. So population is a very important metric here. And I'll be mainly using the entire world as my population. So, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And ideally, when you're comparing with population distributions, you should be comparing which is your world. So think about your organization and all the IP addresses that go in and out of your environment on your firewall or something like that. And that should be your population, your world. It's going to be very different from whatever distribution is there out there. Okay, so we had 3 tests. We're going to talk about these 3 tests. And there's going to be, well, there's actually not going to be some example code, but there's some example code available where you can try to run this test on your stuff, right? But I'm not putting together a metric. There's not going to be a number, right? And especially because I want to keep the friends that I have that have provided me with data. But I guess the point here is that, like all things in life, there's no real right answer. And I just want to make sure, and this is a very strong point in the talks that I try to make. And I'm not very fond of information asymmetry. So if someone is telling you, it's trying to sell you something, you should be able to evaluate for yourself if that is actually going to be useful for you, and not just blindly trust them because whatever marketing strategy they are using at the time. So make sure that whatever you're buying, and I'm pretty sure they're all awesome, and there's a lot of awesome stuff that's publicly available as well, you can freely, on your own lab, compare the stuff that you can get online with the stuff that you're paying for. You might find out that 90% of it is just repeating the stuff you can get online for free. So is it really worth the money? That's a question that I'm not going to ask. It's a question that you yourselves will ask while you're playing with this kind of data. Anyway, so in that point, we start with novelty tests. And this is, again, I'm going to be showing examples of novelty tests being run. And you can pretty much create a bunch of these graphs and everything. And I know the graphs suck. I wanted to do ggplot too, but I'm like, there was not enough time. There will be an update for that. But one thing that I always tell people is get a trial, always get a trial, and try to measure what I'm calling addition and churn. So pretty much each day, right? So when you see the blue curve, so of course the 0 is the 0. You can see the black curve there. But the blue curve is, for each day, what's the percentage of the data on that day that was new, right? So you can see the Alien Vault. Alien Vault is by far the largest data set that I have. This is for inbound, right? They have a bazillion scanning IP addresses that they probably have a bunch of honeypots and stuff. And so on average there, it's like 5% of the IP addresses each day is new. And about maybe 4 or 5% is dropped from the list, right? So if you compare them, so these are the 5% new, and this is the 5% that were on the previous day that left. So you can see that sometimes you have stuff like 20%, sometimes you have a little bit less, and this shield is interestingly consistent for the amount of the size that they have. They only publish the top 100 IP addresses on their public feed, And it's very consistent. It's not changing more than 15%, which is interesting. It kind of gives you the idea that whatever pool they're drawing from, right, it's actually fairly consistent, the guys who are attacking those honeypots. I don't know if that's a decoy technique. I mean, there's a lot of different stuff we don't know on how these things are being produced, but at least you can get a general idea. So the last guy there is the kind of guy that you want to be a little bit weary of, because there's no churn, right? I mean, IPs don't leave the feed. That's a whole month. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure some of these guys were cleaned up, right? And the actual new IPs being added are like, okay, that's a very small number there. And so just be careful. Is this appropriate for your environment or not? You just have to be conscious of that. This is a different view, and this is a view from Outbound. And it brings up another point that you can analyze when you're talking about the novelty test. So is this something that updates daily or like hourly? Some guys, like every hour they have new stuff coming out. Or is this something that is weekly or periodical, or people update when they have the time or something like that? The thing about, there's no interest in good or bad here. And usually the people who do the more weekly kind of stuff, especially on the open side of things, they are actually carefully curating the stuff that goes in. So you have to be careful not to use too much judgment, like, oh, this is not updating fast enough. But some people are very careful with the data they put in, and that's very, very good. And also, the novelty test helps you see some patterns, right? Pretty much how malware domain lists and malware domains had this huge spike. That's about the 29th of June, 30th of June. So for those of you who remember, this was when no IP had that thing with Microsoft, right? And so everyone started publishing a bunch of domain names that they got. So you can kind of see those trends and try to understand. So if everybody moves and whomever you're relying on doesn't move, you might have a lagging indicator. There might be some information there if they're doing their job well or not. But anyway, just be careful not to get an abandoned feed. That happens, right? Just there's way too many. Just make sure you're getting the ones that are good. So moving on, right? You okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. There's an overlap test, and the overlap test is one that it's much better to look at and looking for the similar patterns than the other one. And we want to make sure we're getting different data, right? And as an example here on the inbound, we can see that a lot of those feeds, right, they are kind of sharing data among themselves. I'm not saying they're copying each other. That would be preposterous. But they're probably sharing honeypots or something like that. And there's a lot of information that circulates that we do not see. So sometimes it might be, depending on the kind of infrastructure that you have to actually gather this information and consolidate it, it might be aware for you to drop some feeds because they're not really adding a bunch of stuff that you need. And but just stick with less that cover the best that you have. So just to make sure that you guys get it, the diagonal here is when the feed meets itself, right? So it's always one; it always overlaps with itself. And then the brighter the color, it means there's a more ratio of overlap. And this is a sample with inbound data on a specific. This is the 15th of July. And a similar example with outbound data. Outbound data is interesting. It's very diverse, at least from the feeds that I specifically chose. And if you guys can't read it, and that's all right, of course you can get much larger pictures on the repo. But it's interesting how the zoos there. This is the abuse-CH zoos. It's being there's a high correlation with the information from Alien Vote as well. So Alien Vote is already carrying a lot of stuff from zoos when you use their outbound feed. On that specific day that we saw the spike together with domain lists and malware domain lists and malware domains, you see that's a 25% shade there that they were sharing. They had the similar indications together. Anyway, moving on. When we talk about the population test, we really want to try to make sure that we do the enrichment and we can somehow measure the information that this enrichment brings us. Because, I mean, are things more likely to become from a specific country or a specific other country, right? Are some countries inherently evil and now to get them, right? Are human beings predictable? I mean, these are all big, big questions, but I guess my point is, you shouldn't take anyone's word for that, because different people may be targeting you for different reasons. And let's have a look at some of the stuff that we got here. So this is small. I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but on the top there, we have inbound data for a specific date. These are all the feeds combined, right? I'm not separating them out anymore. And outbound in the middle, and in the end, we have what I'm calling the true population. What I call the true population is this. I'm using the MaxMind GYPDB as a way to enrich these guys. So if I just take that, the actual database, and just count how many IP addresses I have for each specific country, that's my true population. That might be the actual true population, because there's no guarantee that that is 100% correct. But as far as we are concerned, on the test that we're doing, this is the true population, so we can try to test against it. And it's interesting. Of course, from an inbound perspective, China all the way. China is like almost 30% of the traffic is coming from China, and followed closely by the U.S. But when you talk about the outbound, it's curious because actually, if you have to squint a little bit, but they're very close, right? The U.S., the amount of stuff you have coming as hosted in the U.S. Is not as much as the stuff that it's hosted in China, and it's actually quite, at least visually, right? It's a similar proportion, and there might be something wrong with the data, and we will explore this later as well. But it's interesting to try to use this as an exploration technique to the stuff that you actually have. When you look at ASNs, of course we have a bazillion more ASNs, and but it's curious that Google seems to be winning on the public outbound. And of course, there's a lot of parking techniques that park stuff in Google, and we're actually going to analyze that a little bit more later. But China doesn't figure out quite as preeminently there as well, when you think about it. And anyway, inbound is crazy. Inbound, it's all sort of stuff. But I guess the point here is, can we get a better look, right? Because I hate squinting at graphs as well, and that they're not being really helpful. So what we're trying to do is actually do some inference-based counting, and let's do some hypothesis testing that actually the populations that we have in a specific data set, and my true population, for instance, they are the same, and let's see if the data agrees with the fact that these are the same population. It will tell me. I mean, the statistical technique will tell me if it is the same, if it's not the same, and what is the approximate difference, right? We're actually putting together two different types of tests. One of them is an exact binomial test, when I have the true population, which is, like I said, the MaxMind DB or something like that. I can just say, okay, this is the true ratio, and I just want to see how much of my data approximates that ratio, right? And when I actually don't have the true population, I'm trying to compare, for instance, what my data looks like to what the data of the actual thread feed looks like, or comparing two different thread feeds. I have to use a different test. It's a type of chi-squared test that I'm using. I will not explain the statistics here. You're more than welcome to look at Wikipedia, because I will not be able to give a good explanation. You guys won't pick it up anyway. I have no idea what's going on behind. Actually, just a little bit, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. They work. They work. Anyway, why do we care? There's confidence intervals. We have a degree of measure. We have p-values, and I apologize for Alex Hutton, but I didn't do my Bayesian homework very well, so I'm stuck with p-values for now. And but we're trying to be very conservative on the use of these guys. So anyway, let me show you guys what an output like this looks like. So The idea is that we have a confidence interval that is the output of, that's the difference of proportions, right? So we get the data from a specific date, and we're comparing it against the true population. And when we see, and this is a top 10, I'm getting the top 10 countries that I have. I'm not testing everyone, because if the numbers get too small, it starts getting it messes up. It's not able to give me a good answer. And what we get is that there's some are much higher than they should be, like Thailand and the US, and there's like Hong Kong there, there's Russia, of course, but some of them are less than they should be. So China, for instance, is less than they should be. So if you take into consideration, if you go with the idea that there is a correlation between or it's random the way that these things present themselves, right? There's less malicious IPs from China than there should be by the number of IP addresses that are there, and there's some guys who just don't care, like Germany. There, it's like me. I don't know. I'm just chilling, just the same. So it's an interesting view, because then you can start making the decisions for yourself with your data about is there a country really out to get me, right? And of course we do not endorse this, because it makes no sense to make attribution by geolocation. But you start to gather some different information and start to enrich and gather some insight and intelligence from the data that you have. So, I mean, not all countries are covered by hacker spirit animal names. So we provide a guide here. If you guys want to name your own actors for some reason, right? Just to clarify, so capybara is like the south of Brazil, and toucan is like more of the Amazon area. So we actually, there's a very different lineage going on.
What is the same thing with armadillos? Because armadillos are not all over the U.S., right? So me being from Texas, we put that a little bit further south.
But anyway, it's obviously just a joke, but the point is you can start getting the data and trying to get the inference for yourself and trying to see what works best for you or not. And like I said, we can compare different populations. Like, so how did the trend evolve from the 11th of July to the 12th of July? Right? And then we see Thailand again is increasing. We should get an animal for Thailand. I had no good
I'm looking up right now.
I had no good ideas for animals for Thailand. But tiger is India. It's already taken. We need a new one. We need a new one. Yeah. Anyway, but we can use anyway. We're doing this for countries. We can do this for ASNs as well, right? And you see, Google's a top hit there. Again, it's the proportion of the data that I got when I ran this test was 10% more than it should have been. So it's like, let's say 20%, of course that's not the actual number. Let's say that 20% of the IPs of the internet are in Google. I'm saying that 30% of the IPs that I have are malicious. And that sounds wrong, because it kind of is. At first I thought this was only parking, right? Oh yeah, everyone's using 8888 or 1111, 1234. It's all Google owned. But, I mean, it's not parking. And we clean up a little bit, and we see, it's, there's like chrome.google.com in the threat intelligence feed. There's like googleapis.com. That happens a lot. And this kind of analysis, if you're not going through line by line, which no one is the kind of stuff that can help you pinpoint and clean this stuff up. On a very rudimentary term, these are the concepts that are used in MLSec projects for some of the data cleanup that we use for the training of our machine learning models. But anyway, let's get to the good stuff. This is all released now. It's GPL. You can play around with it. You can point at it and laugh on what a bad code it is. And but the idea is that I'm sharing the code that generated all these graphs and did all this analysis. There's some documentation, and yeah, and I really wanted to see some suggestions. If you have new ideas for tests, I really want this to be a work in progress. I have other talks about this subject. This is pretty much what I was able to come with the looming deadline. And anyway, and it's in R. Don't beat me up for this. This is not in Python. But anyway, this is the chance to learn a statistical language, guys. Get with the times. We're all doing big data now. So anyway, but another important question is how do we get the data in, right? And then I invite back my good friend, Kyle.
Yeah, I like big data and I cannot lie. Is that what you're trying to say? So the other thing that we did that I spent a lot of time working on is combine. Not combine, but think of like a harvester. So bringing in all these feeds takes some work. You may want to be able to bring them in not just for your analyses like this, but for different things. There are a number of ways to do that. So we wrote a tool called Combine that's also GPL'd and available to you now. We open sourced it this morning.
Just we really like our needle in the haystack puns in MLSec project, by the way.
Right, and you'll see the names of all the different components kind of follow this. So you've got the Reaper that pulls the feed directly in. Thresher just kind of sorts it out into a data model. Winnower will do the valid. It'll pull out all the reserved addresses. It'll do the enrichment for you. And then Baylor is going to shove it out in some form that you can consume elsewhere. The Cybox piece is not working yet, but CSV and JSON are there now. If anybody wants to send us a pull request, we're happy for those. We're trying to continually feed more stuff into it as we're doing this so you can feed it more. Any of the feeds that are listed there by default, that doesn't mean we think that they're good or that they're bad. It's just that those are the ones that we have. And then finally, when we're doing this enrichment, come on, I'm from Dallas, so Hank Hill's a necessity. Think about the metadata that goes with that. We talked about the context, so bringing in the ASNs, bringing in a little bit of geolocation. We have an open issue to do DNS resolution with other sources, but for now, it's the Farsight DB. And then again, you can just go to mlsecproject.org or to our GitHub organization there and get all of this. As noted earlier, I'm a GPL zealot. Information wants to be free, so we released all of this code in that form so that you can use it for your purposes as well.
Yeah, I guess a point here is that this is something that I alluded before. These are actually components of what we use internally on MLSec project. So the idea was to clean up the code and try to release it and actually replace the internal versions that we use by this version that hopefully one of you guys will be mildly interested and will like file an issue, this suck. And that's pretty much what we're trying to do. This is the idea is to keep this going. And as I learn more stuff, as we learn more stuff, we try to give you new potential windows in the data that you might have to actually help your decision making. So if anyone want to talk more about MLSec project, I'll be available around a whole week, right? And we can test if you have private feeds. We had the original idea of doing private feeds on this talk, but we didn't want to get too much in trouble. But if you're interested about how your feed performs or something like that, we're more than happy to chat around. Anyway, that's almost it. I guess the main takeaway is you have data, analyze it, please, right? And don't just go buying stuff. And there are ways to measure what we're doing. There are ways to try to see if it's a good fit for you, right? And it's probably the best way to go forward before. I mean, you should. I mean, who really buys the first car they see, right? That's pretty much the point. And anyway, if your data is like being left around and not proper exercise, just hand it over to us. We'll take good care of it. Lots of exercise, lots of fun. Play dates and stuff like that. Yeah. And anyway, what you got, my friend? Let's talk. Let's talk. And anyway, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
We have time for Q&A. Anybody?
Questions in back.
That is a good idea. That is something that would could be implemented, right? So what is the median or average age of a thing there? I think that makes perfect sense, and this is definitely something that I should be working on for advancing. That's an excellent suggestion.
That relates a little bit to the novelty test as well. To some degree.
Yeah, but it's not the same. And sometimes weird stuff happens like the thing disappears and then comes back, disappears and then comes back. It becomes a little bit harder to measure, but aging is an excellent suggestion.
Okay, do you have a question?
Where's the mic?
Oh.
Is that okay?
Yes.
So I'm curious on if you have thread feeds or classified by vertical industry, and is that where taking your own population is where that would count in that?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. The thing is, I mean, although I do have access to some of those feeds, more vertical based, and they are semi-private, they're internal sharing, and it was not my intention to publish any data for them on this talk.
And related to that is what we talked about at the beginning about the types of data that you want. IP address feeds a lot of times are not specific about targeted to certain verticals or whatnot. Other types of threat intel will be, and that's where it gets more useful as you ascend the pyramid of pain.
But what we're trying to do is, let's create a set of tools that then you can get your data that you can share with anyone else. It's your industries or something like that. And then you can start comparing how different, and good is a very strong word, but how different or what kind of stuff it has in relation to the just things you can find out laying on the internet. That's precisely the intent.
So do you care about, you said you care about specific data from, like, specifically SSH targeted attacks? Because I started a project called SSH ranking a while ago. It's horribly written and it breaks a lot. But the logging goes through, and basically what I'm doing, I'm collecting who's trying to hit my server and basically ranking who's the best at doing it with just brute force attacks. Would you be interested in that type of data?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
That's good inbound data.
The point is, and the generalization that I made is that I could have like, okay, this is specifically inbound SSH data, right? And we can try to create a picture of what does this inbound SSH data threat looks like, right? But I don't have enough samples from enough people of that specific kind. So stuff like anything like this would potentially help creating this population and then generating not so cool graphs like these ones for going forward. Anyone else? Gabe wanted to say something, but he's not like proactive with the microphone.
So have you tested any of the commercial feeds out there? I mean, obviously you didn't put some of this up here, but what can you tell us?
You want to say something. I have very little to say because I've already just tested against the feeds that come from my employer, and so I like feed.
What I would say is, here's what I would say. If I were to hypothetically run those tests against commercial feeds, right, I would be very surprised not to find a significant overlap with stuff that you can find on the internet. I'm sorry? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, that's actually not the case for the commercial feeds. You'll find very little overlap between them. They tend to be incredibly targeted into what they are selling you.
That varies pretty strongly by feed. I can tell you that.
For some of them, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably getting better stuff than I, and that's very likely. But again, it's all about what's the threat, and we're trying to be very broad in the scope of what are the different analyses like. But yeah, if you're like, oh, there's this specific group that we have been tracking for 5 years, that's hard work, right? And I really respect this kind of work, and these guys will have the best data anywhere about this specific threat group. It's just that sometimes it's, I just want to make sure, that people are able to measure this.
Because I've seen, feeds that are very highly curated, and what you're describing here, this is, we've been tracking this intrusion set, these campaigns, these actors, and those data will have very little overlap. You also have a lot of commercial feeds that oddly seem to overlap almost completely with all of the public feeds that you can get for free, which is why you want to get a trial. If you're going to pay for this stuff, the same way you would negotiate a 30-day trial for a new Bleak and Lights box that you're going to get, you want to get a trial of the data and then run these tools against it and say, what the hell, guys, you're just reselling the Alien Vault or whatever. Or hey, this is good data, this is cool stuff, good, it's worth it.
It's only you can only resell Alien Vault if you are Alien Vault, by the way.
By the license.
Yes. There's one here and there's one here.
Gabe's been waiting patiently.
Yeah.
We gave a mic. All right. Where's the mic? You guys.
Okay, so the indicators you had provide a lot of information about which feeds were providing unique data regularly. However, they didn't provide any information about whether those IPs were potentially false positives. How would you tell if your intelligence feed is just feeding you every IP they can find on the assumption that that increases the number of malicious IPs in that feed?
If I knew that answer, I'd be rich right now. Yeah, no, I mean, this is a very hard question, of course, and the way that I do this involves a lot of statistical and machine learning trickery. But it's like in a way it draws a level of confidence on is this the only guy that's reporting this specific IP address over all the population of guys that I've heard talk about this kind of stuff, right? And the actual idea with this project, this specific sub project, is to try to create better tools for you to be able to do this semi-automatically, right? I mean, I was speaking on Chrome there, chrome.google.com, right? Maybe it was a watering hole someday. I think not, right? Because the Google people generally know what they're doing. But we usually get stuff like that from watering holes. And yeah, there's a place for a feed with watering holes, but that shouldn't be mixed up with the feed of the stuff that you really know is
Everything on that side is bad.
Yeah. So there's always a problem of classification of what you're getting, and people just mix a bunch of stuff up, and sometimes you don't know. So I specifically had a hard time with some feeds that they just decided that it's not just malicious stuff, it's also ad stuff. So any ad networks also go in the feed, and I'm like, man, that's the whole internet. Let's just block everyone. So it really depends. Again, you have to be able to try to tell if what you're getting is good for you. I have one there. Yeah. Okay, let pretty boy talk.
So I'm curious, did you look at any of the data and compare it to something like known IP ranges of major cloud providers to see if sort of any of these threat feeds skew toward cloud providers in any way?
What an interesting question.
Isn't like Amazon the second one? Yeah. Yeah, so I haven't done specifically that, right? But man, if you can get an IP address for cheap, that's a great place to drop your malware. But it doesn't stay. The problem is the volume is too large. It doesn't usually stay there that long, right? Because again, the Amazon guys generally know what they're doing, and they can certainly pick stuff up like that.
I guess I'm kind of curious though, like if there was any indication that maybe some of these people actually place their honeypots inside of cloud providers, and that they might skew toward more IPs from cloud providers showing up in their list, because they might scan sort of locally, right? It's cheap to scan inside of AWS.
No, I didn't specifically.
It might be very off topic.
But that's interesting.
I was kind of curious.
That's an interesting thing, but I'm not. Yes. Sinkholes is a very interesting subject that I want to look in.
That might be a good talk for next time.
Yeah.
Hey, I just had a quick one for you. So, in the several hundreds of thousands of IPs we're blacklisting right now, I did a quick and dirty OpenBL comparison to my 100,000 initial build list to look for accuracy, thinking there'd be some correlation between OpenBL, its full list, so 39,000 compared to my 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take a guess of how many overlapped?
No. 5%.
28.
Just
So
28. 28.
Just 28
units.
IPs between
Okay.
39,000 and 100,000. Our list is now growing close to 1 million. Over the weekend, we had 1 million new accounts created by these guys. The capability, from my perspective, of this bad IP range is global. Literally, I'm saying IPs from countries that I didn't know have ranges. I think their capabilities is coming out, and I'm rather shocked at the enormity of it. And then how little I found in OpenBL, just as a simple comparison. I think it justifies that some blacklists will be targeted to certain industries.
Yeah, definitely.
But
And
man, this thing I'm dealing
there's
with is
and there's
huge.
I haven't really explored this, but there's a huge skew on country, right? If your honeypots are in the U.S. or if your honeypots are in Europe, it's ridiculously different. The kind of action that you see. And yeah, that's awesome. We should definitely talk. I'll give you a card or something. Yeah. I guess that's it. I'm sorry. Sorry for you'll never get this hour back. I'm sorry.
I'm wasting away.
Oh no, go ahead.